Ron Johnson's been a lone voice in the wilderness inside of government for many years, and we are eternally grateful for all of the hearings and the things that he has done to bring awareness to the reality that is taking place today. It's very simple. This is a story that's been blown out of proportion. The misleading facts have been coming from mainstream press. The fact is this: vaccine injury is real. It happens. People are injured every single year. Children are maimed and killed every single year by our vaccine program. There are many that will say, well, it's rare. Does that mean we shouldn't talk about it? Do we talk about rare diseases? Do we try to cure rare diseases? Why is it in this one topic you are ridiculed, attacked, said that you're spreading misinformation for stating the obvious facts? My name's Bigtree. I am the CEO of MAHA Alliance, MAHA Worldwide, MAHA Action. But really, I'm just one representative of many, many incredible voices in a grassroots movement, a true grassroots movement for medical freedom that started many years ago and now has found real focus in this movement that we're now calling MAHA. I want to take just one moment to thank President Donald Trump, someone who is the first candidate that we ever saw dare to make the statement that vaccines cause autism, or that he thought that they did, that he wanted to do investigations into vaccines. And I'm not talking about this last election. I'm talking about the very first one. And every time he was asked in different scenarios, or whether it was on a debate stage, he said, I have seen children run across my office that were healthy, went and got a vaccination, and suddenly we're having issues spelling and reading. And we've heard the story over and over again. I'm one of those that has probably heard that story more than most because I decided to do an investigation. I'm just like you, all of you in the room. I'm just a journalist. I'm just a reporter. No, I have no medical degree, but I did work for over 6 years on a medical talk show called The Doctors, where every single week I read medical journals to find stories of breaking news and science, and I learned to understand how to read that science. As Robert Kennedy Jr. has said the very same thing about being a lawyer. When I think, where is this movement coming from? What is it? I've seen all of the reporting. How far back do we go? Robert Kennedy Jr. began talking about this when he was first asked by parents that were coming up at his environmental hearings, where he was talking about mercury in the water, saying it's toxic, it's destroying health. And those mothers said, will you please look at the vaccines? There is mercury. The same thing you're fighting to get out of our water is being injected into our children. Of course, he was reticent because mainstream media and mainstream medicine scares everyone away from ever doing any investigation into that. But eventually a mother sat outside of his door with a stack of studies, and he couldn't ignore her, and he began reading. It's much like what happened to me. I was working on the Doctor's television show, and I was tipped off that there was a whistleblower inside the CDC named Dr. William Thompson, who was going to come forward and say that they were committing scientific fraud in the vaccine safety studies, specifically the MMR autism study. I made a documentary ultimately about that because, as many of you are aware, I pitched it to my executive producers. I know who you work for. I work for CBS. And they said, we're never going to go near that story. There is no way we are going to do a story that calls out the CDC and says that they're committing fraud of any kind, because we got to go and report on the latest flu epidemic, and they would let us behind the scenes, and we would make it into television, and we're not going to hurt that relationship. We're also not going to go after a product made by Merck, who's just one of the pharmaceutical companies that fund this show and fund most of television. As you well know, if you work in television, somewhere between 50 to 70% of advertising is coming from the pharmaceutical industry, which is why you're mandated to write the things that you write and told the things that you cannot write. So sometimes it takes courage to step out and do investigation beyond that. Let me show you very quickly where that investigation should start for all of you. These are vaccine inserts. I had my COO, Bridget Rasmussen, go by a doctor and say, we'd just like to see some vaccine inserts. Twinrix, I mean, I could read them off, Haverix, Shingrix. They didn't do infants, so we didn't get hepatitis B and those things. But I find it shocking, and you should find it shocking as a reporter, how many times I've read, well, the experts say, when Del Bigtree or Robert Kennedy Jr. says that there's been no placebo-based trials to establish safety prior to licensure, I would probably put money that none of you reporters have ever grabbed one of these and read it. Or if you did, then how did you write, the experts say, that that is misinformation? Because it's written in every single insert that shows up with every single vaccine that you've taken and that our children have been given. There's a very interesting conversation that happened during the hearings between Rand Paul and Senator Cassidy. Senator Cassidy brought up the importance of the hepatitis B vaccine, telling an anecdotal story about a young girl that he cared a lot about who was having liver failure. A tragic story, absolutely. But for Robert Kennedy Jr. and I and so many people in this room and thousands and thousands and thousands of parents, there is a story of a regression into autism, or of seizures, or of encephalitis, swelling of the brain in their babies after a vaccination, that apparently we're not supposed to care about that story. That Bobby Kennedy can't tell that story. That child doesn't matter. In the conversation, Rand Paul pointed out that hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. The vaccine was developed for prostitutes and people that were having extreme sexual relations or heroin addicts. And he said, I think that a parent should have a right to decide whether they vaccinate their one-day-old baby, which is when this vaccine is delivered all across America. You should be able to opt out of a hepatitis B vaccine, since it is unlikely that in the near future for a day-one-old baby they will be having extreme sexual intercourse or sharing heroin needles. So what is the purpose? And of course, Senator Cassidy, and I'm very glad that he had as many deep conversations as he did with Robert Kennedy Jr., but right before our eyes we saw what conversation can happen when reasonable people start talking about an issue that they've never been allowed to talk about before. Senator Cassidy, in front of television all across the world, had to state, you know what? You're making a good point. It is a sexually transmitted disease, but in mothers that are hepatitis B positive, that vaccine is going to save that infant. Senator Rand Paul pointed out, rightfully so, that every mother in America is tested prior to delivering a baby. We know whether they are hepatitis B positive or not. So why is every woman being forced to give their baby a hepatitis B vaccine when we already know their status? And right there, in front of the world, Senator Cassidy said, you know what? Okay, I don't think a mother should be forced to take it if she's hepatitis B negative. We just watched the first transformation.
In fact, you can charge up to and drain down your Patriot Power Generator 2000